I'm Mike Davis, and in this video I'm going to give you the top 10 tips on how to put together these board game inserts. Love these things, they're great, but they can be a pain sometimes to put together. So I'm going to show you some tips on how to make it easier. Alright guys, we're going to go over the top 10 tips on putting together these board game inserts, and I am going to be using the board game insert from Broken Token for Mysterium, the board game, one of our favorites here in the family. And I'm going to be building the board game insert, putting it together, and showing you the tips on how to put these together while I build this out. So you may be asking yourself, why am I in my kitchen here and not over my board game table putting this together? Well, that brings us to tip number 1. Use a hard surface, like this countertop right here, one that's not going to get dented, because while you're putting this together and you're using, say, a hobby hammer or something like that and banging, if you're using something like a wooden table, you can make dents and indentions in your table, which I actually did to my board game table, unfortunately, once. So I've learned my lesson. Use a nice hard surface. So this kitchen counter island that I have is a perfect place to put these together, because I don't have to worry about damaging this. So that's tip number 1. Use a hard surface. Tip number 2, after you have the board game insert out of the box, you want to lay these sheets out in order based on what you see in the instructions. So each of these has an instruction sheet, and in the instruction sheet inside here, there is a layout of the sheets from left to right. So I'm going to lay these out from left to right in order, matching what's in the instructions here to ensure that I can find the pieces much easier. Alright, so now I have all these laid out where I need them in order based on the instructions here, which brings me to tip number 3. Do not punch out all the pieces right at the beginning. Don't think, oh, I'll just go ahead and punch all these out and then start putting these together. No, don't do that, because the instructions are very specific on which ones to pop out. They'll say punch out part 3G and 2B and then not 2B. Alright, anyway, so to tell which ones to punch out. So you want to make sure you find those, and the numbers and letters are not written on the actual small pieces that you're going to punch out. They're on the board sometimes in the bottom left corner. It'll tell you what board number it is, but you're basically going to need to have them still in the sections here to punch them out to figure out what numbers and letters and what pieces you need. So do not punch them all out at the beginning. Punch them out as you need them. So let's get started with this. I'm going to go ahead and start. You always start with the top left instruction here and start punching these out as I go. So it tells me I need 3G, and 7D. I'm going to punch those out and start putting things together. Alright, so I just started punching out my first couple of pieces here, and I've already run into another tip that I want to give you. When you're removing these pieces, you need to wiggle them. Wiggle it just a little bit to get it out. Don't force it out. I'm going to show you this up close so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Alright, so this is the piece right here that I need to punch out of the board, and up here is where it connects at. If I just try to force this out, I could actually split the wood. There is a small little piece of wood that connects to the top here, and then there's a very small little piece of wood here that connects at the bottom. The rest of this is pretty free floating in here. So to get this out, what I like to do, and I'll do it from the back here so you can see it, I'm just going to wiggle it just back and forth, just kind of flex it back and forth, one direction then the other direction, back and forth. And if you do that a couple of times, after you just wiggle it just a little bit, eventually you'll see it just pop loose like that, and then it should just rotate and come right out. Again, just a little bit of friction, boom, there we go, and it comes out. So wiggle it to get it out. Alright, that brings me to my next tip. Tip number 5. You want to make sure you pay attention to the orientation of the pieces. Not just the pieces themselves, but also there's some images on there that you want to make sure those are facing the right direction, but also the direction of the pieces. So sometimes placing this piece onto here looks like it fits perfectly fine, and it may fit, but then later on you find out, oh, it was supposed to be rotated this way. And because you've done it backwards, now you've got to break it apart. So make sure you're paying attention to the instructions. They have usually pretty good call outs on where the orientation is, has little images. Sometimes they'll have little millimeter measurements on the instructions, but make sure you're paying attention to exactly where the piece goes and what direction it faces when you're putting it together. And that brings me to tip number 6, and that is get yourself a hobby hammer. These are pretty cheap. This one cost me, I think, $10 on Amazon. Cheap little tool to have. Please get one of these. They make your job so much easier in putting these together. I can basically tap on this. Sorry, this is loud. And that's pretty much it. That piece is together now. When I did these without a hobby hammer, it was such a pain and it would take quite a while to put these together. So I tap them from one direction, tap from the other direction, and once you tap it from both directions like that, you're good to go. Now that I've got this joint together, that brings me to tip number 7 when putting these together. You want to ensure that you have flat, nice, smooth surfaces on each edge when putting these things together. So if you're inserting a piece inside of a slot in another piece, make sure it's flush on the back side. And if you're doing these corners like this, you should be able to hold it up and see a nice flat edge on both sides. Let me show you what that looks like. Alright, so this is the flat edge I just put together. If you look right down the line here, you should see a nice smooth edge that way and a nice smooth edge this way. If any of the pieces are not fully flush with the side, I'm going to tap that with your hammer a little bit more to get that nice and flush so that it is flat along both sides when you complete these together. This is another example of making sure that something is flush here. So I've banged in this piece here. I want to make sure that when I rub my finger across there that it is nice and flush. It does not divot down inside of there or come out of there. It is nice and flush with the edge there. So something else I'll point out, this is not really one of the tips, but just something I'll point out. In the instructions, when you go from one item to the next or one step to the next step will have some gray pieces in the images, and those gray pieces mean those are things you've already put together. So when you get to that second step or third step or whatever step you're on, if the gray pieces don't look like what you've already built, you missed something somewhere. You want to go back and double check that. Alright, so I have all of the pieces together for the insert now, which brings me to my last and final tip, tip number 10. You want to secure these pieces with a little piece of tape on each corner. You could use glue, and that's fine, that'll work also. I do not use glue, and I'll tell you why. It's because I'm human, and I make mistakes. And I have put these together before, and you think a part goes in the right place, and you put it there, you double check, and then afterwards you realize, ooh, that doesn't go there, it goes over here on this side instead. And if you've glued it together, and that glue is dried, you're in a tough spot. So I recommend using tape. Myself, I use invisible tape. This is cheap stuff you could get at any store, like Target or whatever. And I just put a little piece on each corner, maybe one across the edges on the corner and the bottoms, just to make sure that the trays don't fall apart. Now I know what you're thinking. Wood, it should stay together. I just bang this together with a hammer. It should stay together. But wood is very flexible, and it expands and contracts with heat and cold and moisture, and especially with the humidity here in Florida where I live, these things can move around quite a bit. So I found them, sometimes they'll get loose, sometimes they'll get tighter. So a little piece of tape on the corners and the edges works great. So I'm going to do that to all of these trays, especially the trays you're going to pull out of the box. The ones that stay in the box, you don't have to worry about, but the ones you're going to pull out of the box, you definitely want to have those secured so they don't fall apart. Nothing's worse than pulling a tray out of a box, the bottom falling out, and all the cards or components going all over the table. So I'm going to put a piece of tape on each one of these, and then we'll put it in the box and see what it looks like. Alright, so I'm going to try to show you an example of the tape here. Here we go. If I get it in the light, you can see there is a piece of tape. I just put it right around the corner there. That's invisible tape. So you can barely see that on there. I've got one on the bottom here too. So I put those on. That helps hold together the edges of this. So I just did it as a last resort. You don't have to, but I find it really helps hold these together. And I have had these, when I pulled this out of the box, I have had one had the bottom fall out of it. So this just prevents that from happening. And that's the top 10 tips on how to put together those board game inserts. If you guys feel like I nailed it in this video, how about giving me a like and maybe subscribe so you can watch more videos just like this. If there's a video you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. If you have questions, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, guys. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, how about give us a like and maybe subscribe. If you have an idea for a video for us to do in the future, we'd love to hear it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.